We've come together to prepare for another election. This election is about needing a White House and a Congress who fight to return America to a country where our kids, the dreams of our kids, still come true. We understand this in SEIU, how change really happens in America. When we unite our voice through this wonderful organization called SEIU, we can be the wind that steers America in a new direction.
I'll spend my entire adult life working with SEIU. And it taught me change happens when millions of voices come together.
So, good evening. Is it evening or afternoon? Yeah. My name is Marshall Ganz. I want to welcome you to this forum conversation with Andy Stern, President of the Service Employees International Union. It's a very appropriate time to hear from our speaker. On the one hand, the challenge of economic justice could not be greater than it is at this moment. The greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression daily yields more loss, more uncertainty, and more suffering, and cuts most deeply into the fortunes of the people our speaker represents. On the other hand, as a nation, we're experiencing a greater sense of hope with respect to our politics than at any time in my recollection since the time of John F. Kennedy. And it is a politics in which our speaker's organization has played and continues to play a major role. The Protestant theologian Walter Brueggemann describes such a moment as prophetic. On the one hand, it's a critical moment when we have a clear eye of the world's pain, suffering, and limitations. But on the other hand, it's a hopeful moment, a moment when we can appreciate the world's possibilities, joys, and potential, or as Tom Hayden put it more succinctly, change is slow except when it's fast, and we're in a fast moment now. So why is this such a good time to hear from our speaker? The plight of the poor, the janitors, security guards, new immigrants, service worker, home care worker has been with us for a long time. In fact, the plight of the working poor in this country has been like that of the miner's canary. You know the miner's canary? The miners would take the canary down into the coal mines because the canary had a weak respiratory system. And so when the poison would come out of the mines, poison gas, the canary would keel over, and so the miners could get out in time. The lot of the poor and the lot of the workers our speaker represents have been like the miner's canary because of their vulnerability, not because of their responsibility, which has made them vulnerable to the poison that has been in our mine for many, many years, but which is now spread to engulf us all. So if there's one, now that the poison is getting to us, we need to recognize that there is certainly one group that more than any other has been down there in the mines, and that's the labor movement, particularly the union led by our speaker. On the other hand, for the first time since 1935, a serious prospect of labor law reform is before us. Legislation that could actually make it practically possible for workers to join unions on a large scale, a scale unequaled since the Depression. In the forefront of securing passage for this legislation and preparing the leadership in the organizing that will follow also stands the union led by our speaker. Finally, our speaker's union has also led the way in another important direction. That is the introduction of young people to the work of economic justice as researchers, negotiators, and most especially organizers. My late wife, Susan Eaton, for example, as her first job fresh out of Harvard in 1981, went to work for this union, devoting 12 years of her life to make its cause her own. So now, to introduce our speaker, it's both appropriate and my pleasure to introduce Jake Waxman, MPP2, chair of the organizing caucus here at the Kennedy School. Jake.
Turn these up. Thanks, Marshall. And many thanks to the Institute of Politics for putting this event together and recognizing the importance of bringing a voice for organizing and for working class people to this place of public conversation. Last year, a group of students came together here at the Kennedy School when organizing still wasn't that cool to encourage these kind of events. I actually first heard about Andy Stern a number of years back during my senior year in college when I helped to found a living wage movement at Emory University in Atlanta. It was a rather unusual way to spend my time, but it wasn't an accident. I was raised in a family in Hawaii where your contribution to your community mattered much more than the kind of car you drove, or the brand of your clothes, or the size of your house. When my colleagues here are asking me about my experience in organizing, there's a few stories I like to tell. When I came to school at Emory, I found a different world where money and social standing determined your lot in life. It didn't seem right that an institution as wealthy as Emory could pay its workers so little. They were getting paid close to minimum wage. So I got involved in a living wage movement at the same time that a similar effort was taking place here at Harvard. This same desire to give voice to those who are often voiceless led me to take a job with SEIU, where I organized hospital workers to fight for better working conditions. Another story I often tell when people ask me what it was like to work for a union is the story of Donna Roundtree, who was a hospital worker and SEIU member in Southern California. I want to share that story with you now. Donna was a licensed vocational nurse at a hospital in Riverside, just outside of LA. She was a single mom who worked 2 full-time jobs in hospitals to support her teenage daughter. When I met her, she was just trying to keep her head above water. She had hoped to advance her career by studying for a registered nursing degree, but didn't have the time to take the necessary classes. She got involved in the union because the staffing during her night shift at the hospital was often dangerously low, forcing her and her other caregivers to run themselves ragged just to get patients the care they needed. To add insult to injury, her pay was nearly 50% below what area hospitals were paying their workers, even though her hospital was one of the most profitable in the state as well as in the country. She had brought these issues up to the hospital's management, but they had not responded. So she got involved in the union, organizing her fellow workers to take action and speaking out to tell the community what was going on. After a few months of strong resistance from the hospital, we settled a great contract, and I sat down with Donna to tell her what we had won. First, we talked about the new system for addressing staffing shortages, and she was thrilled. There would be an opportunity to increase the staffing on her floor. And then we walked through the wage increases, year by year. And as we got to the 3rd year, she began to cry tears of joy. When I asked her why, she said, "That means I won't have to work 2 jobs anymore." This is why I worked for a union. When I came to the Kennedy School, I vowed to never forget Donna, and the millions of workers like her who bravely speak out to change their lives. It was with the idea of getting these voices heard at the Kennedy School that our group of students, the organizers pick, decided to invite Andy Stern to address this forum audience. Andy Stern, as Marshall mentioned, is the president of the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, for whom I worked. He has spent his career striving to give voice to workers like Donna. Like Donna, Andy Stern got involved in his union as a member when he began working as a social service worker in 1973, and rose through the ranks before his election to SEIU president in 1996. Since then, he has been the head of the fastest growing union in the United States, whose membership is now over 2 million strong. In that time, along with overseeing a doubling of that membership, he has found time to write a book called A Country That Works, Getting America Back on Track, about the need for a renewed union movement. 3 years ago, he led the SEIU out of the AFL-CIO to form Change to Win, a new labor federation aimed at organizing the 9 out of 10 workers in this country who don't have a union. Along with winning contracts like the one I described earlier, SEIU is politically active, mobilizing millions of voters across the country to fight for broad-based healthcare reform and to address the growing income gap in America. Most recently, the union played a big role in the election of Barack Obama. They are undoubtedly a force to be reckoned with. Please join me in welcoming Andy Stern.
Thank you, Jake. And thank you, Donna, who's not here with us. And I appreciate all the kind words that Jake has said about me. But after you've been a member for 37 years of this union and the president for the last 12, you're wise enough to understand that all the kind words that people say about me belong to so many others like Jake and Donna in our union. All 2 million members can't be here to tell their story. It'd be a rather remarkable, I think, and stirring moment. But I would like to introduce Shirley Cheeseburger just for a second here to tell her story. Shirley is a new member of our union, a laundry worker from Brooklyn, New York, and I just wanted her to say a word or two. Shirley?
Good evening. Okay, my name is Shirley Cheeseburger, and as Andrew stated, I work in a laundry in Brooklyn, New York, and I've worked there for 28 years. I fold tablecloths for restaurants. Some people might wonder why, a union. A union is important because a lot of people do not have health insurance. They're raising families, and you cannot make a decent wage. With the union, you can get a living wage. You can get health care benefits for yourself and your family, your children. And I feel those things are important. A lot of places, when you retire, you don't get pension. Well, my union, we can get a pension when we retire. It's not a big one, but it's a decent pension. I tell you, I had an aunt that worked in the laundry industry for 45 years. And she retired back in the 80s, late 80s, She retired, in 1989. And she received a pension check for $68.25. That cannot help you do nothing with the economy nowadays. So I would suggest that, if you are working, you're not in a union, that you try to organize your shop. Because the union can take you a long way. It helps a lot. It can help you put your children to school, because there was a scholarship fund at my union, and my son, who applied for the scholarship, he was able to get money to attend the University of Massachusetts. Okay?
All the kind words, as I said, that people say about me belong to people like Shirley. They belong to a lot of people here in Massachusetts. They belong to Nancy Diaz, who's a janitor here at Harvard, cleans the Harvard Business School, one of the 750 janitors, members of our union. They belong to Paul Kane, the leader of the 250 security officers at our union, some of them here present in this meeting. They belong to Evelyn D'Alembert, who is an immigrant from Haiti. She's one of 10,000 Massachusetts child care workers. She went to college, is now working on her master's degree, takes care of 10 children in her home, 12 hours a day. And as much as we say we honor people who take care of our kids, she makes less than $20,000 a year. And compare that to Mary Tillman, who's one of the 22,000 personal care assistants who've just joined our union in Massachusetts. Mary has 4 children, 20 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren, and 3 of whom she raises. Mary also has asthma, and as a personal care assistant before the union, never got a paid day off in her life. Used to go to work with asthma, which was neither good for her or good for her consumer. But now, as a result of her first contract here in Massachusetts, she got a 15% raise, paid time off, and looks forward to bargaining for health insurance. They, along with the other 90,000 members that joined our union, the 2.1 million members who are part of our union, are people that I love. They are part of my union family, and I admire the work they do every day. But I actually don't really just want to talk about them tonight. I want to talk about this country, because I love this country even more. I love America. I happen to think America is a gift. And its greatest gift is that people come here to places like Harvard from all over the world, like my grandfather did as a butcher in Newark, New Jersey. All he ever expected, he was going to work hard. All he ever hoped for, that his work would be rewarded. But what he dreamed about was that his kids and his grandkids were going to lead a better life than he did. That is the unique and wonderful American dream. And despite a civil war, 2 world wars, recessions, depressions, natural disasters, 43 different presidents, that American dream has endured up until now. 79% of parents, 79% of parents, like me, now say their kid, they don't think will do better than they do. That's not the America we want. That's not the America we need. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because I think there are solutions to this problem. But the first part of finding the solution is understanding that we face a challenge that arises out of a very significant economic change in our country. And I'm not talking about the economic crisis that we currently are facing. The first truth we need to appreciate if we're going to solve America's economic crisis is this is not our father's or our grandfather's economy. For those people like me who time longingly wish to return to the days of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, we're as far today from the New Deal as the New Deal was from the Civil War. And I'm sure Franklin Roosevelt admired Abraham Lincoln. He didn't build an industrial economy around 1865 any more than we're going to build a global economy around 1935. The second truth, and really the most profound thing I don't think we've come to grips with, at least in our country, maybe in the world, is that our country and the whole world is living through the most profound, the most transformative, the most significant economic revolution in the history of the world. You know, there have only been 3 economic revolutions in world history. The agricultural revolution, it took 3,000 years. The Industrial Revolution, it took 300 years. This revolution, and we should appreciate we are living through the 3rd economic revolution as we transform ourselves from a manufacturing to a service, knowledge, green, finance, genomic, you can name the economy, but more importantly, from a national to an international economy. This revolution's only going to take 30 years. No single generation of people in the entire history of the world have ever witnessed this much change in a single lifetime. This revolution is actually televised. It's Googleized, it's digitized, it's globalized, it's on your face, on your screens, 24/7. It is relentless, it is unending, and significantly, it's far from over. As a result, we have the 3rd truth of the new economy, which Thomas Friedman, I must admit, was partially right. That we are living in a converging, global, integrated marketplace. 4th truth, which we're witnessing now in the G20 summit. We created global trade, we created global finance, we created global companies, but we forgot to create a global government, or a global organization, or global regulators, as Sakarsi is talking about now. So for nearly the last decade, the global economy, the rules of the global economy have not been made by countries, they've been made by companies. Of the 100 top economic entities in the world, 50% are companies and 50% are countries. Walmart sales are greater than the GDP of Ireland or Singapore. And now we've seen with the collapse of the global economy, a new understanding. I would happen to be at Davos, and I would say they're going to rename this year's Davos as the revenge of the countries over the companies. Because all of a sudden we realize we let global capitalism run amok, and we need global regulation. And today we began the process in London of actually putting in place those regulations. 5th truth about the new economy. America faces its first real economic competitor in our history, and that's China. China is for real. By 2025 or 35, and now maybe with the economic collapse even sooner, China will have the largest economy in the world. And it's building up a reserve of capital, human and financial, that is almost unbelievable. 90% of all the scientists in the world by 2015 will come from the Asian Pacific region. In 2000, America was really proud. We had 65,000 Intel Science Fair finalists, our highest number ever. China had 6 million. In 2007, the world produced more transistors than grains of rice, and the transistors actually cost less. Finally, the last truth, which is important to people like me and our union, is the structure of employers and the nature of work is going to change dramatically, and it is changing in front of our eyes. Employees and employers are separating. They're on their way to getting a divorce. And we're transitioning in America from an employer-managed work life, where I grew up, particularly in good union jobs in Pennsylvania, where the employer managed your health care, the employer managed your pension, the employer managed your career development, the employer managed your retiree health, and then the employer managed your retirement party if you were lucky, to self-managed work lives. And we have no systems, no infrastructure, no ways in America to provide the benefits, and leaving American workers incredibly vulnerable. In addition, by 2011 or 2012, 25% of all American workers will be contingent or free agents. They will have no full-time employer. My son's 22, and I'm told he will have 9 to 12 jobs by the time he's 35. And then there was Joseph Schumpeter, who has an economic theory about creative destruction. Well, here's what's happening in America and around the world. Only 1/3 of the companies that exist today will be economically viable in 25 years. So if you're counting on your employer for your health care and your pension and your benefits, and 2/3 of them are not going to be here in 25 years, that's a big gamble and a big risk. So employer-based health care, employer-based pensions, employer-based training, employer-based health care for retirees really will become a relic of an industrial economy, but we yet have no idea what substitutes in their place. So we now know, having watched this economic revolution, what is the result of the first phase of it, the first 10 years of it. Well, here's what we know. Goldman Sachs tells us that the share of the GDP goes to profits has been at record high, and the share of GDP that goes to wages is at a record low. We know now that for the 5th straight year, American workers haven't gotten a raise, according to the Census Bureau, the longest period of economic stagnation in the history of our country. Now, I say we could have solved this problem a lot more easily, and I don't know why someone in the Harvard, one of the Institute for Politics or Policy Centers, didn't get this one prescription that would have changed everything. See, if we had indexed the minimum wage to CEO salaries, the minimum wage would be $23.50 right now, and I wouldn't be up here giving a speech. America would be just fine. Thank you very much. 2 years ago, probably the new revolutionary theorist of America, Alan Greenspan, prophesied that he said the gap between the rich and the rest of the population is growing so wide and so fast that it threatens democratic capitalism. And he was right. Here we are. Now, you got to give Bill Clinton credit. He was the first one to actually understand we were in a different economy. We were in the third economic revolution. And he actually talked about it. He talked about building a bridge to the 21st century. Unfortunately, he built a bridge out of global high-tech jobs, and the bridge collapsed in 1999 when the tech bubble burst. And then we got George Bush. Now, George Bush almost drowned the 21st century economy because he tried to put in a 21st century economy the 20th century market-worshipping, privatizing, deregulating, trickle-down economy. Unfortunately, we've barely made it through that. But the budget that is being debated this week, and I want people to conceptualize this budget very differently than I think America is now, is the first new American economic plan. It's the first time America is actually coming together and talking about investment, whether it's energy, healthcare, or education, whether it's reimagining the role of the government as actually an investor, as well as a regulator, a market shaper, and a market maker. And so all of a sudden, we are witnessing the first new American economic plan led by the government, not necessarily led by the private sector, and trying to bring together business, labor, and government like they did in Ireland, to actually make a different social contract. Now, the good thing about President Obama's plan is he understands there's a big difference between GDP growth and job growth and wage growth. As I like to say, when President Clinton was there, he was very proud, appropriately, that he created 20 million jobs. Except most of our members said, and I got 3. So We now have a new metric. The president says he wants to judge the new economy, whether it increases the number of people in the middle class, whether we have shared prosperity, not just whether we have growth, which is a fundamental different philosophy than we've seen in our country up to date. Now, how do we distribute wealth in the country? And this is my sort of last big point. There's only three major ways our country has ever shared the economic success. The first is the market. And we used to have a time when increases in workers' productivity once translated more directly into raises in your paycheck. In fact, John Kennedy, where we're here today, used to say a rising tide raises all boats. But now we know in the last decade, it's only been the luxury liners, and the rest of the boats are sinking in America. The market is a fickle, unreliable, and certainly in a global economy, not anything we can count on as a sole way that we're going to distribute wealth. The second, obviously, is government. And clearly, government has a major opportunity to distribute wealth through the EITC, through tax policies, through minimum wages, through living wages. The government has a role in distributing wealth or social benefits like Medicare, Medicaid, children's health insurance. They can intervene in the market and try to equalize the distribution between capital and labor. The problem is the government's a really fickle partner. And if we have to wait for another 8 years of George Bush to get us out of what we hope are being done here, that's not what I want to bank on in the long run. So here's the point. The third major way we've distributed wealth in America has been this odd, iconoclastic, not necessarily pure, clean thing called unions. The distributive role of unions economically was actually one of the many policies that President Roosevelt put in place in another economic crisis in 1935. He passed the Wagner Act, now called the National Labor Relations Act, which simply allowed workers to self-organize and bargain with their employer. And for those of you, when we talk about the Employee Free Choice Act in a second, all the Employee Free Choice Act does is 73 years later restore the original intention of the law that President Roosevelt passed to try to solve an economic crisis in a Great Depression, similarly as we're trying to solve an economic crisis now. But here's what happened after Roosevelt passed that law and unions began to do something they forgot about for a long time, which is organize. We actually tripled the number of people in unions between 1935 and 1945. Now, if all that did was put more money in union leaders' pockets or we built great institutions and nice buildings, it wouldn't have been worth anything. But what we actually did is we went from the Great Depression to the Great Compression. We saw a dramatic rise in those 10 years for wages of ordinary workers, and we saw a vast reduction in income inequality, which is somewhat of a timely idea for our current economic crisis. The Great Compression was followed by a post-war boom, and together, unions and the post-war boom doubled the standard of living for American workers in a single generation. That was good work. Good economic work by government, good economic work by non-governmental organizations. But beginning in the 70s, the stories of unions become clear. Employers go on an attack unabated till today. Laws were changed, the courts eroded workers' rights, and what happened is we decoupled. We decoupled productivity from wages. Up until then, they were totally aligned, and we decoupled it. And so in the next 25 years, from 1980 to 2008, next 28 years, while productivity grew 75%, workers only got 30% of the increase in productivity. They only got 22% of the 75% increase. So for the first time, we had decoupled wages and productivity. In fact, if we had not done that, American workers would make, on average, 42.7% more money today had we simply allowed the same tie between productivity and workers' wages to continue. But without unions, there was no one to make those gains shared by everyone. And if we just had the same amount of union members as we had when I started in 1983 in SEIU in the National Union as an organizer, we would have wages, because the union workers make about 12% more than non-union workers, we'd have wages, $49 billion more in wages right now in America. Now, I appreciate I'm here at Harvard, and my academic credentials are rather limited. You don't want to see my GPA from college, and don't want to know much about my college history. So I appreciate people could say, yeah, that's really right, but that's just Andy Stern's economic philosophy. So let's try a number of people. Let's try Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke wrote last year, at least 20% of the inequality in America is caused by, quote, a lack of union bargaining power. That's the Fed chair. Bob Rubin, not necessarily known as the most liberal, pro-union person in the world, wrote an editorial this year with Jared Bernstein, who is the vice president's economic advisor, where he said, well, first they acknowledged the real income of workers, households has fallen $2,000 between 2000 and 2007. Americans worked 7 years and lost $2,000 in real wage. And they said, not me, one factor behind this outcome is, Bob Rubin, decline in union membership. They wrote, many years ago, the economist John Kenneth Galbraith argued that collective bargaining was necessary, so workers had the countervailing force. They needed to bargain for their fair share of the growth they helped produce. They continued to say, to reestablish that force, workers should be allowed to choose to be unionized or not. And then to complete my economic argument, I want to quote 4 Nobel laureates and 40 other major economists, including Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz, who wrote, quote, the erosion of workers' ability to form unions and bargain collectively has shifted the wealth for our country from broadly shared prosperity to growing inequality. He says yet only 7.5% of private sector workers are now represented. Why is this disconnect? Now, this is not me, these are Nobel Prize laureates, which I think means they know something. The problem, he said, is that the election process overseen by the National Labor Board has become drawn out, acrimonious, management campaigns fearfully to deter unionization, all the way to the extent of violating labor laws. Union sympathizers, as Paul may have seen, are routinely threatened or even fired, and they have little effective recourse under the law. And even when workers overcome the pressure, they said, and vote for the union, they're unable to obtain contracts 1/3 of the time. And Elaine Bernard certainly knows about that. So the Employee Free Choice Act, which is being debated in Congress, or whatever you want to call the reform of labor law, is both a moral and human rights issue. But I think we don't appreciate it's an economic necessity as well if we're going to try to get this country back on its feet. 3 things the Employee Free Choice Act does quickly. It allows the right to self-organization that existed in 1935 to be restored by majority of people signing cards or petition, which is the law of 9 states in the United States for public workers. It's a law of 3 Canadian provinces and almost every other major industrial nation around the world. It triples damages for employees who are fired for union supporters or break the law, and allows first contract arbitration. Now, this seems like a fairly non-revolutionary thing. It's done around the world, but you would think from the employer community, this is the most unbelievably, nefarious idea that has ever been invented, even though it created the Great Compression, and so they were proven wrong. And actually, CEOs now call this Armageddon. They call it the end of civilization as we know it, as the former head of Home Depot called it. And they use the exact same arguments that have been proven long when the law was debated in 1935, where they say the rise of unions would cripple the economy and it would end employment in America, which is the same thing that, in case you don't know, they say about the minimum wage, they say about Family and Medical Leave Act, they say about living wage laws. So we have the same conservatives with the same arguments, and here's the punchline. No matter what you think about unions, and I appreciate unions are a rather, complicated issue in people's personal lives and people's work lives. I understand that people wonder about union ideology, union politics, union leaders. And I probably have as many ideas or criticisms of the union movement as anyone in this room. The punchline is this: they work. As a distribution force in this economy, they work, and we have found nothing. We have found nothing else that works. So if there are other ways to do it, I hope someone's going to step forward. We know the problems of the market. We live it every day. We know the problems of government, and we do know the results of unions. When they're smart, when they're strategic, when they understand competition, when they're pro-quality, there are a lot of factors involved in this, but unions actually work. They've been the best long-term anti-poverty program, the best jobs program, welfare program, health and safety program, health care program, retirement program America ever had. And for a country that's printing money in the basement of the Treasury, the good news is they don't cost the government a dime. It's a non-governmental way we can actually solve our problems. It is not a surprise that President Obama has included the Employee Free Choice Act as part of his economic recovery plan, not as some union-friendly gesture, because he understands if we're going to bring back the middle class like he saw in Chicago, unions are part of the problem. So let me just end by saying, America is not going to build a 21st century economy on a foundation of inequality. It's just not going to work. We're watching what's happening every single day. We need a 21st century economy, though, that recognizes we're in the midst of a new economic moment and America needs a plan. Now, historically, we have demonstrated as unions, whether we're in garment or construction, food store, hospital, childcare, laundries, security officers, that we can distribute money and productivity and the gains more fairly. We don't want to just share in the pain. We actually want to share, when this economy turns around, in the gain. And that's why it's important that we have some countervailing force to deal with these employers. We are at a historic crossroads. We are at the historic crossroad, I think, economically in my lifetime, in terms of what a new president is trying to do and the different way we're going to try to evaluate the economy. And we're at a moment that I want to quote Heidi and Alvin Toffler, who wrote, "Humanity faces a quantum leap forward, and we are engaged in building a remarkable new civilization from the ground up." And I would just say part of that construction must be stronger voices and greater opportunities for people like Shirley and Donna and others who every day go out and do what America expects of them, take responsibility, work hard, and they need to have that work rewarded. And if we can do that, if we can build a new economy based on a different sense of justice and fairness and equality, the American dream still can come true. That's what our union does every single day. Try to make the dreams of parents and children still come true. We can do this because, as Margaret Mead once said, never doubt, never doubt. And Barack Obama is living proof that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if not us, our members, our allies, our friends, our country, then who? And if not now at this time of economic change, if not now, then when? Thank you.
So now we come to the questions. There's a little sheet they give you here that you're supposed to read of the rules. So I'm going to read the rules. First, all questioners must identify themselves. All right, make it clear? Second, one brief question per person, no speeches. Okay? Everybody got that? Third, a question is something that concludes with a question mark. Okay? And those are the rules, and so let's have at it, right here.
Shalom. My name is Ari Cole, and I'm a mid-career alumnus of the Kennedy School class of 2008. I wanted to say thank you so much for many years of great service here at Harvard. I came here in 1987 as summer school faculty and became a student, and the whole time, your union has kept this place safe, clean, efficient. You guys do a phenomenal job, and we owe you a round of applause.
Here for the security officers here.
God bless you all.
And the janitors.
You're what makes America special. Thank you. We as future government leaders, or young government leaders, as one of my groups on Facebook is named, what would you say are 3 things that we can carry as action points to help you as young government leaders of the future, because you're so important and your results are excellent? What can we do? 3 action points.
So one is, I think people don't appreciate government's role as a purchaser. They think a lot about the government's role as a regulator or a legislator, but a purchaser. And if you look at how much money is spent by the federal government or state and local government, it's enormous. And what we've seen is there are ways to spend that money that allow people, A, the right to organize, but B, allow people the ability to use that money to not be low bid oriented, but to be value-based. I would just say in the city of New York, they do value-based contracting, which is one of the few cities that does it, and they look at whether people provide health care, whether they actually don't break the law, whether they pay their taxes, and don't just say, are they the lowest bidder. We just finished a study with the Center for American Progress, and we now know that government procurement, federal government procurement, that over 50% of the jobs pay $8 an hour or less. So we have our government sort of subsidizing poverty and then asking the government of those companies to pay for the health care, food stamps, and other services. So one is, think about yourself not just as a legislator or an executive, but a purchaser, and I think there's a lot of opportunities you can have. Two is, there are ways, through political involvement that governors, mayors, and others are able to help solve problems, solve transit strikes, allow workers to organize, allow new hotels to be open that are union. And so there's a lot of opportunities, I'd say, non-governmentally to use your influence to do that. And then, people are looking. I think, when Barack Obama went to the White House and said, unions are part of the solution, not part of the problem, I think all of us, had a moment. And I don't think you appreciate how important it is for people in power to get up and say, people deserve unions. Work should pay. I want to use this office to increase the number of people in the middle class. So use your voice, use your purchasing power, and use your influence.
Toto.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, Mr. Stern. Thank you for coming today.
Andy,
thank you. All right. My name is Jay Kyram. I'm a first-year Master's of Public Policy student at Kennedy School. I wanted to ask you, with many of our cities today facing fiscal financial crisis, and public sector unions representing such a large percentage of overall union membership, what advice or counsel do you have for both politicians and the leaders of public sector unions on how we can manage this crisis and keep our cities solvent?
That's been a complicated process we're living through right now. I mean, the good news about where there are unions, at least we're bargaining our way through this process and finding different solutions like furlough days or job sharing or other, kinds of things. But I think it really goes to the whole question of how are we going to finance our country in the long run, because, we just have a situation where, we have not decided as a nation we want to fund public service adequately, and whether you're the Massachusetts child care worker who we all say, our kids are our most important thing, early education is what we want to invest in. Here's a woman who went to Wellesley College, is going to get her master's degree and makes less than $20,000 a year. It doesn't seem like our values are linking up. So one, I think we have a whole discussion about tax policy. Two is I think we need to negotiate our way through this. Three, though, and what we're trying to do in our union, and this will be a controversial thing even within our union, is we want to be a pro-quality union, because I think unions have been seen as an obstacle to change, in the public sector, somewhat. And we went to our convention and our members said, we actually go and do these jobs because we want to do public service. We didn't go there to create work rules. We ain't there, but we want to be partners. And, we now have a huge work that we're doing with AFSCME and the AFT in Colorado, where we actually organize the state workers. Actually, the name of the union is called Colorado Wins. And we're actually trying to be a pro-quality, pro-public service union, where we're interested not just in ourselves, but the services we provide. And I think we need to reposition ourselves because that's what our members want.
Thank you. Up here.
Hi, I'm Nora Firm. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. In some countries around the world, like Colombia and the Philippines, there are high levels of anti-union violence. So I wanted to ask what SEIU is doing to promote trade policies here that promote not only the rights and jobs of workers in the United States, but also those of workers abroad.
Well, two things. One is, which is a longer discussion, we are actually trying to, in essence, form a global union, because trade went global, company went global, finance went global, unions can't be local. It's just not going to work as a proposition. Two is, the unions have been incredibly active in stopping the Colombia Free Trade Agreement exactly because of the violence. And I appreciate when I was talking to the trade representative, she said, it's really gotten a lot better down there. They used to kill 200 union leaders a year, and they're only killing 100. And I said, well, that's good, except if you're one in 100. And that doesn't seem like a very high bar that we can allow our country to kill 100 union leaders a year. So I think it is trying to tie together with human rights activists, the relationship between our government's policies, whether it's trade, whether it's purchasing goods in general, whether it's foreign aid, should be tied to human rights. And we work with unions around the world to do that.
Up there.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for being here. My name's Kent. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. So 1 in 100 U.S. adults can't benefit from economic prosperity because they're in prison. That's 1 in 100 U.S. adults. So my question is, what is SEIU doing to promote more fair and just sentencing and incarceration policies?
Probably not enough. We were against three strikes. In the initiative process, we have been for reform. We've been for, ending three strikes, you're out. We were not in favor of, the drug laws that the Rockefeller, but I would just say it is not something we spend enough time on. But, we work with lots of people, that are funded by OSI and other foundations that have done a lot of work around this up to now.
Thank you. Over here.
Shirley, worked for many years with the communication workers here in Massachusetts. I have a quick question about some recent well-publicized tensions within Change to Win. One of the things that I think many people in this room really liked about Change to Win when it was formed 4 years ago, that it was trying to get away from the old cannibalism of the AFL. Unions would stick to their own jurisdiction, not compete with each other, not get involved in raiding, and the whole labor movement would be stronger. I've been getting a lot of press releases and statements recently from a fellow founding father of Change to Win, Brother Wilhelm, accusing you of being a czar, of being an imperialist, of having
That's on a good day.
He's beginning to sound like me. But to get to the point, he's accusing you of brazen interference in his union's jurisdiction. Unite Here's jurisdiction, of course, is culinary workers, cafeteria workers, hotel workers. And he says that your union is now about to launch a major organizing campaign in all of these areas that are traditional hotel worker jurisdiction. And this is a fellow Change to Win union. Could you comment on how this came about only 4 years after the great shining initial promise of the new Unity Partnership?
Well, the good news is people like Shirley can probably tell you the story a lot more fully because she's lived through this. The union Unite Here, is a product of a merger of two different unions, Unite, which is the Isle Lady Garment Workers Union and Textile Workers Union, J.P. Stevens, and HERE. 5 years ago, we went to them and said this: the nature of work and the nature of ownership of hotels is beginning to coalesce with the nature of ownership of real estate, and that we should all be in the same union. If you take the owner of Hilton, is also the owner of Equity Properties, which was the largest real estate company in the world, because people that own real estate don't see the distinctions between what services are provided. So we went and said, and the clearest example of this is obviously condo hotels. And we were getting into disputes in condo hotels, which sounds like the building trades, about whether the janitor in the lobby was the janitor for the hotel or the janitor for the higher level floors where the residents lived. And so we went to them and said we should have one big union. They appropriately, Unite and Here, decided to merge. And 4 years later, after a year's worth of a one union process, committee, mediated effort, the merger, according to the mediator and most people involved, has failed. And now one part of the union has left and asked to be with us, and we welcome them joyously. When it comes to organizing hotels, we've said to HRE, we have no desire to compete. We have a complete desire to cooperate, as we do with AFSCME around home care and child care, as we do now with the nurses around health care. There is a totally appropriate way to put more workers in this union and do it collaboratively, not competitively.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, my name is Johnny Bowman. I'm a member of Student Labor Action Movement here at Harvard College. And I'd first like to thank you for all the work you've done, as well as Boston Local 615, which is at the forefront right now of a no layoffs campaign here at Harvard. In order
Doing
to
a press conference tomorrow with all of you.
Well, thank you, but to save Harvard jobs right now amidst the budget cuts. My question was actually pretty much the same thing that was just said, but I'd like to just give a follow-up. And so do you see the future of the labor movement being completely competitionless, or how do you see unions in the future cooperating more? Besides, merging is one of those strategies, but...
Yeah, I would say, here's our problem. We only represent 7.5% of the private sector and declining. And as I spent a lot of time explaining, that's not good for America. Forget the labor movement. If we had to sell all our buildings and all of us didn't have jobs, it wouldn't be the biggest problem in America. It's just that no one's going to get any kind of equality in this country without that change. In a perfect world, we would have a much more integrated labor movement than we have now, with different sectors where people focused and a sort of a stronger federation type model that provided the political and other services that everyone needs, but the industrial strength that needs to come, by unions thinking about, well, I have to organize auto, and I have to organize real estate, and I have to organize hospitals. And, I don't know how we get there, but all I can tell you is around the world, there are long histories of what are called multi-jurisdictional general workers' unions, and I don't think they work very well because, as we see in the auto industry, the auto industry made one big strategic mistake that has ended up costing them enormously, which is they forgot to organize Honda, Toyota, Mazda, and Hyundai. And when it was the big three and they dominated the entire the entire national marketplace, they could set wages and take wages out of competition. Now that the big three are less than half, the majority is non-union and they're driving all the wages down. And so we have to find ways industrially to form unions, and it doesn't have to be mergers, but it does have to be a common strategy with national employers if we want to do what's right for the workers.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ben Reno Weber. I'm a joint degree with the Kennedy School and the Business School.
Great.
And I just wanted to, across the river, it's sort of taken as given that a union shop or union operation is going to be less efficient, is going to be less able to innovate, is going to be less competitive. And in the absence of competition between unions, when there basically is a sort of, at least admittedly fractious underneath, but united front, how is it that you keep a union good? You listed a number of caveats about what makes a good union, but what kind of enforcement mechanism is there on unions themselves?
I would say, if I was being hypothetical, I would say, democracy. But I don't necessarily think, as I would say in America, that democracy necessarily produces innovation, or it's a good system, but not necessarily, to produce all kinds of different results. I don't know. We were talking about the same thing earlier about government. I happen to be one of the few people in America who actually believes in term limits, significant enough time serving, because I think organizations do get ossified, whether you're a healthcare provider, whether you're AIG, whether you're, a government, having the same people run the business all the time, is not necessarily an innovative experience. And I think, we saw with GM, all the inbred management couldn't sort of see the context of what they're doing with. So I don't know. I mean, I actually, one of the only votes I've ever lost at SEIU was to try to have the president have to retire after a certain number of years. And I could say it didn't pass because they all loved me so much, but they were all worried about what it meant for them. So I don't know, but I think the whole question of how do you keep institutions alive when they tend to, by definition, ossify is incredibly important. And I would just say the union movement's too small to say that competition would really do that, but you never know.
Thanks. Over here.
Hi, my name is Morna Ha. I'm an MPP at the Kennedy School. SEIU has been one of the most vocal supporters of comprehensive immigration reform in the past couple of years. And as we talk about the economy, immigration reform is actually one of the ways to strengthen the economy and also ensure that people, anyone who works with dignity in the United States, is able to live and work here with legal status. Unfortunately, in this current economic crisis, there may be many who disagree with that. I'm wondering how will SEIU continue to support immigrant workers and also continue to place immigration reform as a top national priority?
So, in the last question first, at our convention, one of the three things we promised we would get done in the next 4 years was, one, pass health care for every man, woman, and child. Two, was to allow our labor laws to change so people did get a real choice. And three was to allow every, tax-paying, hardworking immigrant a pathway to citizenship who chose it. I'd say we're on our way to health care. America's about to, I think, have the real debate and actually pass something this time about health care. Employee Free Choice Act is a shaky proposition because of the employer community, but it's this close from being done. And I'm actually incredibly optimistic, and I may be one of the few, that we're actually going to debate immigration reform this year, at the end of the year. I mean, I think what we've seen with this president is an odd thing. There were a group of aggressive people when President Obama was getting elected, sitting around, what do we do in Washington? We have to hold him accountable. All the forces are going to pull him in a different direction. And now I say, we don't have to hold him accountable, we just have to try to keep up with him. Because he's reshaping things so fundamentally quickly that all the different groups are now just working together to pass the budget because everything in the world is in the budget for change, except for immigration reform. And I think we are starting to see, in a non-stated way, the end of the raids. which I think is a huge step forward and something all of us have been, working towards. I think, we will see some things about reunification of families and others that'll begin to liberalize. But I actually think there's a chance, and I just think it's too early to tell, but I think if we have a successful president, and I think the next 6 months tells us whether we get a successful president or whether people push back enough that he's not successful, and I'm not saying be perfect, or, I think he will take a shot at immigration reform, and it would be such an incredible moment, to have this country focused on it, because it doesn't seem as bad in Washington. The politicians don't seem as, maybe because they keep losing elections trying to be, racist reactionaries, it doesn't seem to be quite the political thing it used to be. And so I'm not saying if it doesn't come up again that Rush Limbaugh will get on the radio with O'Reilly and it'll all Lou Dobbs and dig it back up, but I think we're going to get a shot.
Thank you. Over here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Joshua Koritz. I'm a member of the Harvard Union of Clerical Technical Workers. It's AFSCME Local 3650. Harvard here is the richest university in the world. It's the second richest nonprofit in the world after the Vatican. And at the same time, lately, it is crying poverty, and it is laying off SEIU workers, and it's threatening layoffs of workers all over the place. Also, in conjunction with that, we're seeing trillions of dollars go to private banks, while our public services are being cut. So, I mean, my question is, what do you think of these things, and how can we fight these layoffs that are so clearly cynical?
So I'd say, President Obama was asked at a news conference. I will get to this point in a long way. When John McCain asked about a procurement policy, and he said to President Obama, and you're going to have to make a hard choice because, there's been these cost overruns on your new helicopter. And he turned around and said to everybody, a new helicopter? He said, I like my helicopter. He said, now, I've never had a helicopter before, so I'm not sure what I'm missing, but seems perfectly fine to me. And I think it's sort of the same issue here of like, okay, so you had $28 billion, and you only have, I don't know what the endowment is worth now. I'm sure you could seem poor. Seems pretty significant to me, and it seems like we put money in the bank for rainy days, and it's raining, right? And in a community where we try to take care of each other, it would seem appropriate to imagine taking the money we put aside for a rainy day to try to spend some of it right now to help people until the upturn. But at some point, either Harvard should stop charging tuition or become a franchise like McDonald's and open them up around the world, or do something with that money besides seeing how much they can amass. People amassing money is not a goal, an end in itself. It's a means, and I don't think at a time like this they should use the money they have to get people over a difficult time, and I think they should.
Thank you. Over there.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a master's student at the
Do I get thrown out now? The lights go off? Cut this.
My question is, I thought it was interesting that you talked about the government as a purchaser, because I was thinking about how SEIU is also a purchaser with its hundreds of billions of dollars of pension funds. So I was wondering what you all are doing to take that money out of places like Goldman Sachs and put it towards community investments that will benefit and be controlled by the community.
So, we have spent a lot of time trying to figure out it's a complicated issue because our members' money is their future and their pensions, and they want to make sure it's dealt with as fiduciaries should deal with money appropriately. And then we have a set of government regulations that only America could create, about what your role is as a fiduciary, which basically says you should turn it over to some investment manager to avoid getting sued, and then everything will be fine. And then they turn it over to whoever they turn it over to, which are all the same people that are all going out of business right now because they stole our money. So it's kind of a nefarious little Ponzi scheme. And actually, if you go to the International Foundation training session, your new trainee orientation as a trustee is to tell you, don't do anything. You could lose your house. You could just give the money to somebody else and let them do it. So what we've tried to do is try to get people to set up, alternative investments for part of it. We talk to people about ESOPs and other kinds of funds that we've tried to imagine. Chris and others have been trying to create. And so, we have a 10% portion of our fund that is in alternative investments that do a series of things from trying not to invest in certain places around the world, to try to give minority investors opportunities, and try to give money to sort of alternative investments that meet our fiduciary responsibilities that actually do things we're more more positive about, and which our members also, though, can be assured that their money, is providing a level of return. Everything, as David Rubenstein, whose buildings across the way, has learned, you cannot produce 28% returns, without leveraging things until they collapse. And if that's, we can't make an economy around financing, so that all the people that put all their money into the private equity firms because they could make money forever are now looking for those alternative investments that could have paid mezzanine level returns, 8 or 10%, and actually would have done something better. So I think we do have a different moment here.
Hi, my name is Farron McLurkin, and I am a union organizer. So I talk to workers every day for a living, and I realize how difficult, sort of in just the person-to-person conversations we have, it is for workers to organize unions, not only because of the challenges in terms of dealing with employers, but in terms of sort of the general culture not being unionized enough, frankly, and you touched on that. So I think that we need to organize a lot more workers. I'm wondering where you think the next big strides in organizing are going to be, what industries, and if there are industries that have been difficult for unions to organize in before, how you think we get there.
So, as I like to say, the only issue, the major issue facing workers about organizing is very simple. It's the employer. People say, well, workers don't want unions. I haven't found that to be true. Obviously, everyone doesn't want a union, but I keep saying we've conducted the greatest empirical study in the history of America, because you take a group of kids that come out of the same high school, go to the same college, and one of them goes into the public sector, and one of them goes into the private sector, and lo and behold, whether you're a principal or an engineer in the public sector, you end up in the union, and you're in the private sector, you don't. So you can either say, God, it's just the way people self-select, or you can say, well, maybe employer behavior actually affects what choices people make. And when people say, I don't really believe that, I say, okay, tell yourself, your wife, your husband, your kid to go into work tomorrow, go up to the employer and say, you know what, I think I want a voice on this job. I'm going to talk to my coworkers about a union, and watch what happens. If people think this is not a big problem, employer behavior. And everybody shrivels up and they say, I'm not going to go. I understand what would happen if I said that. So we need to deal with employers allowing workers to make a free choice, which is what you want them to do every single day. And that means either changing the law, like the Employee Free Choice Act. It means in areas like green jobs, where the government is really basically the funder, of green jobs, because it's all coming out of our taxpayers' dollars. You do wonder why they should be allowed to fight unions, or more importantly, how the unions and employers form partnerships in a new industry that forms a different kind of union, because when you're doing weatherization and things like that, you have a different set of skill sets. You could bring members of the community into the union. You could allow people to get apprentices into higher skilled jobs. So I think the whole green economy is an enormous opportunity, because it is where a lot of our economy is going to go. A. B, it's never really had unions because it really hasn't existed. And 3, the government, a good government, is the major funder right now of many of those jobs. And we should use that role that we talked about earlier to do something significant to make them good jobs. These weatherization jobs will be $8 an hour jobs if someone doesn't do something about it.
Thank you.
Steve, last 2 questions.
Steve Helfer, I work at the law school. Again about, as a staff member, again about the Harvard situation. The Cambridge City Council recently suggested that instead of laying off low-wage workers, Harvard University adopt a pay cut for higher administrators and possibly even faculty, and maybe even across the board as staff members. The Crimson yesterday editorialized that this is impossible because it could jeopardize the educational mission. What do you think of wage cuts for people like President Faust, the faculty, and others?
Boy, it could be my last invitation, I can tell, to this place, isn't it? So I answer this question. I always believe, that cutting people's pay in general is not a good thing. There are certain people I make exception for, and it's not your president, but there are a lot of people like Ken Lewis and others who, should not only not have a job, more or less make money. 2 is I really don't like pitting people against each other. And I think you happen to have a unique situation specifically in Harvard, which is you do have a huge endowment. And just like mayors and governors create rainy day funds for a purpose, you have your own version of a rainy day fund. I don't think people conceptualize it that way, but there's money in a bank that can be found to pay to solve what I hope is a temporary problem, you know, and that's what this is. We're not talking about structural problems forever. We're talking about a temporary problem, and I assume the endowment only grows. It won't shrink that much more. So to me, I think there are better alternatives than, you know, simply trying to see which group of people share in the pain when I think there's a way that's somewhat painless here.
Okay, last question. Lupe.
Hello, my name is Lupe Gaboa, and I worked with Marshall on the grape and lettuce boycott in the 1970s. And, I'm now refreshing my organizing skills by being a community fellow at his organizing class. The reason we were forced to boycott was because, as you know, farm workers as a class were originally excluded from the original Wagner Act in the 1930s. They were excluded not because agriculture is any different, but because of a compromise. You know, at that time, the Democrats were Southern Dixiecrats, and so a big deal, Faustian deal was made that they would allow the passage of the Wagner Act if farm workers and domestics were excluded, you know, which happened to be, you know, brown and black people. Fast forward to more than 70 years later, you know, there's again, the domestic workers and farm workers are not going to be included under the Employee Free Choice Act, which I think is tragic. I mean, these are some of the most vulnerable workers in the country that do very important jobs. I'd like to know what your position is on that, and if they're not included now, when? I mean, are we going to have to wait another 70 years?
You know, I think, you know, we are going to need to rewrite the bill, and I think there's a lot of discussion going on. You know, I think the original intention was to pass this bill, we need to make as few changes in the law as possible, because once we start there, we end up in, you know, let's make right to work in every state, and, you know, the world just increasingly spins out of control, because we've never passed labor law reform. The last time we tried was 30 years ago, and we haven't tried since. So there was a theory of the case that started when, you know, amongst Congressman Miller and people that are huge supporters of farm workers and others, we could only make a limited number of changes to solve a specific number of problems. I think if we're going to get to the point where, which I think we are getting to, where we're going to have a more wide open debate, I think it has to be part of the debate.
Okay. Andy, do you want to?
No, but so as I like to say, you know, to all the people who work hard every day here at Harvard and all the people who take responsibility for their family, this is a moment in American history where we still can make dreams come true. And it's still, if not us, then who? And really, if not now, then when? Thanks.
I want to thank all of you for your participation. And Andy, I want to thank you very much for coming. Don't you think we need to see more of him around here? Yeah.
That's my local leaders. I want them all to stand up. Come on, stand up. These are the people that run the union up here.
Thank you so much for coming. Good night.